Hello again. This is Bob Denis talking to my esteemed colleague, Dr. Ravid. And we're going to actually, Stacey is going to interview me this time to ask questions that she's had about some of the stuff that I've worked on. Now, full disclosure, I have actually seen a list of her proposed questions because she did not want to shock or dismay me, but none of them were offensive. But this is really more of a free rolling discussion, so that the questions can go any direction, and I will just answer them to the best of my ability. And also, we don't edit videos, so if I say something that's wrong, I will post, errata below the video, as I sometimes do. Sometimes I get things wrong, but hey, that's just life. So view this as just a discussion between scientific colleagues, and this is not medical advice. This is not intended for anyone to take as medical advice. But we're going to talk without restraint about our scientific opinions about things. So that's what we're going to do. So I guess that's it. So Stacey, what was it you wanted to know?
Hi, I'm Dr. Stacey Ravid, and I just completed a dissertation study on the micropulse. And one of the things that I was interested about were the protocols. And in the dissertation study, I noticed that different participants use different protocols. So I wanted to make this interview about the protocols. My first question, Dr. Denis, is what was the initial purpose of creating the different protocols?
Well, actually, Dr. Ravid, I think your first question was, Bob, you idiot, why didn't you introduce me? and the answer is because, yes, indeed, I am an idiot, and I forgot, okay? I forgot to do so because I was trying to, make things as relaxed as possible. But, because people have already seen you if they're watching our channel. But number two, so the question was, how did I come up with, or why did I make these various protocols?
Why did you make different protocols, and how many?
I'll show these in a moment, but we're talking now about the most recent, like Generation 6 ICES technology. People who use our stuff know that's what it's called. So this would be like the Model M1 and the B5 and the C5. And there's 25 or 30 protocols on there. And what I mean by protocol is not a medical protocol. It's a scientific protocol, or an engineering parlance. It's just a pattern. It's a pulse pattern. Okay, why did I put all those pulse patterns on there? And this is going to kind of be the same answer for all of your questions, because people have asked me for them, and they've asked me, and they've asked me, and then they've asked me again, and then they've asked me again. And so I've been asked for these protocols at least, by my rough back of the envelope calculations, at least 7,000 different times. We're talking about a lot of times, because many people are very interested in PEMF and what it does. But almost everybody has been dominated by this wrong-minded discussion on the internet about PEMF, about how it's entirely a function of frequency, and it's not. Frequency, as far as I can tell, is not the key thing that makes PEMF work. What makes PEMF work, I think, is waveform. But everyone, and I mean their mother's brother's dog, and people, just everywhere, ask me, what's the best frequency? What's the best protocol for this? Or why do you have the protocols you have? And at first I only made a device with one protocol, and it would be tuned to one specific waveform shape, which is a trapezoid, which I did a lot of calculations, a lot of experiments to determine had a biological effect. But you only have to be, in my opinion, approximately correct on the frequency. But I got asked this question so many times, and I had people begging me, literally saying, I just want to try 4 hertz, or I just want to try this, or I just want to try that. So I took all the suggestions and all the requests, and I put them into an enormous list. I mean, a big list. And I boiled it down to 30 requests, or so, and these are the protocols. that people asked for all the time. And so I just simply said, okay, I don't think this is what makes a difference. And of course, by the way, I'm always wrong about things. So I'm a scientist, right? Being a scientist is the art of being wrong and then learning something from that and getting better. So what I did was I broke it down into groups and patterns. Do you want me to show these now? I kind of would like to share.
Yes, great idea.
So what I did was I put it into groups. So if you have an M1, or you can go to our website, you can load this, you can download this from the product page. I'll try to put a link down there. The protocols that Stacey is asking me about, that everyone has asked me about, are listed really briefly. They're outlined here. And the top group is in sort of the pastel blue, B5-C5, A9, P2, or Omni 8. And those are actually the protocols that I was testing, that I have been testing, I'm still testing. And it started off with the P2, which I developed with, actually developed this for Dr. William Pollack maybe 10 years ago. And then the A9, and then the Omni 8, and now it's the B5-C5. And all that is those are actually patterns of pulses that emulate musculoskeletal development in utero. So basically it's like slow muscle twitch and fast muscle twitch interspersed with periods, in some of them, periods where there's no actual stimulation, because my background was research on muscle physiology, and I did a fair amount of research on muscle tissue development. And the thing that you notice when you're studying muscle tissue development is that, in utero, fetuses contract. They have to. Okay, and then some people have done suppression of this neurological activity during development. And when you do that, neuromuscular development doesn't happen, and the fetal development does not follow a normal course. So it seemed to me that this type of pattern of activity was kind of important. So just as a wild scientific speculation, I thought, well, maybe there's something about this pattern that is pro-growth and pro-development. And that's why these patterns are the way they are. And these are the ones, and there's a development from the P2 to the A9 to the Omni 8 to the B5, where I've added in and tweaked a little bit of a frequency here and there and combined them in different ways and had different timings. That's why those look the way they do. There's no strong scientific basis that says you have to do it this way. That's just what I have been trying, because I thought that it would work, and based on my experiments, it seems to work. Then the next one, and this is the most interesting request, I think, are the Schumann frequencies. So in the pastel sort of yellow section right here, you've got Schumann 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And what that means is, like, which resonances do I include? So there's a thing called a Schumann resonance. And what that is if you imagine the Earth as a huge spherical bell, and that bell is actually defined by the ionosphere, okay? And that's the upper atmosphere, where it's there's charged particles. And every time lightning strikes somewhere on Earth, it kind of rings that bell, okay? And that generates something called a Schumann frequency. And a lot of people think, oh, it's this precise, resonance with the Earth. That's not. It's actually a resonance with an irregular atmospheric shell that changes in its dimensions. So people say it's 7.83 hertz, but it turns out it's around there, and it changes over time. It's also very hard to measure it. But people believe, they have these very strong beliefs that somehow we need to resonate with the Earth. And I'll explain to you where that comes from in just a moment, where part of that belief comes from. But anyway, there's resonances. So like when you ring that bell, it will ring at a primary frequency, which is about 7.83 hertz. And then on top of that is 14.3 hertz, and then 20.8, and then 27.3, and then 33.8. So I can add each one of these on as you click up from Schumann 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 to 5. Now it turns out that these seem to be right in the sweet spot for PEMF frequencies. It's sort of the range of 5 or 10 hertz up to maybe 100. So they do have biological benefit. And a lot of people say, aha, that proves it. Schumann is the magical frequency. Doesn't prove that at all. Just because it happens to randomly be in the right range doesn't mean that it's a precise frequency. But I had so many people, and I would say thousands of people, ask me for that I just went ahead and I put it in there. And you'll notice that every single one of these categories I have that's color coded starts with the word experiment. So if you want to experiment with the Schumann frequencies, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe we are resonating with the goddess, stuff like that. I don't think so, but I have been wrong more than I've been right about this kind of stuff. So I put it on there, and if people discover something wonderful, they can tell me about it. So if you want me to, I'll just go through the rest of them so you can see where these things come from.
Please do.
Okay, so below the yellow section, there's the pastel pink, which says experiment with fixed constant frequencies. Now, these are most of, but not all of, the lower frequencies that are steady fixed frequencies that have been published in the scientific literature. Many people would contact me and say, hey, I read these papers on prostate, benign prostate hyperplasia and different things, and they say 4 hertz works, 5 hertz does not work, stuff like that. And there's some statistical kind of hokey pokey going on here, I think. But some people just absolutely say, I got to have 1 hertz, or I got to have 10 hertz. It's got to be exact. And they're just absolutely, they have what's called mind freeze, actually. It's actually a clinically recognized thing now, I guess, mind freeze, where they get an idea in their head and they just absolutely positively, no matter what evidence you put forward, they just will not change their opinion. So a lot of people have mind freeze, that there's one special magic frequency and they've got to have it. So these are the ones that have been published. These are the ones that people fixate on besides the Schumann frequencies the most. And hey, I'm fine with it. It's easy enough for me to program that in there to this group, so I did. So you can pick 1 or 2 or 3, 4, 5, or 10. And those are the most frequent ones you're going to find in the scientific literature that are lower frequencies. There's a lot of higher frequency ones. Why do I define them as PPS, pulses per second, instead of hertz? And that's a really good question. I actually have a whole video on that, but it turns out it's a signal processing, kind of a mathematical engineering nerd kind of thing. Because when people, I'm from an older generation of engineers. When people say hertz, when people say frequency, we're not talking about pulses per second like you talk about now for a computer clock. When my generation of engineers would talk about frequency, we were talking about the first time derivative of phase, which means you're taking a derivative of like, for example, a sinusoid, and that tells you how quickly, the frequency is defined by how quickly the wave is changing, and that turns out to be one number if you're looking at a sinusoid, but it turns out to be many numbers. So if you actually use the classical definition for frequency, a square wave, then you end up with a bunch of different frequencies of primary and then all the harmonics. And so to try to be technically precise, I try to define things with engineering precision as pulses per second. But for the purposes of people using PEMF, if you're not a PhD in physics or electrical engineering, pulses per second in hertz means the same thing, right? And then this one was like a wild sort of one that lots of people had asked me about. They had heard about transcranial magnetic stimulation. So if you look at the green pastel, what that is that's my attempt to reconcile and address and then offer what I thought my own personal unproven, unscientifically proven interpretation of the consensus papers on transcranial magnetic stimulation. By the way, TMS is it's something where they can hold a magnet to the side of your head, pulsing magnet coils, and they use it for for making you actually contract. You can hold it over your motor cortex, but you can also hold it over your left prefrontal cortex. And it is apparently, from what I read and from what I hear clinically, it's a good treatment for refractory depression, right? But if you read the science behind transcranial magnetic stimulation, almost everybody who does this clinically says we're forced, because of FDA regulations, to remain within, what has been approved. We're forced to use too much power. And it's the big side effect of transcranial magnetic stimulation is that if you don't place the coils just right, you can make a person go into a seizure. They start doing the funky chicken because it's way too powerful, because the early research in that area used a machine that was just turned up way too high. And so what I'm doing is I'm saying, well, let's consider it's the subcritical threshold transcranial magnetic stimulation. So it's not going to cause muscular skeletal contractions. So simply by intelligently approaching TMS, if you turn it down to what's called the MT motor threshold, the only FDA approved use of TMS at the time that I read this was above the motor threshold, which means by definition, if you put the coils in the wrong place, you're going to cause a person to start having the one major side effect that's undesirable, which is a seizure. So what is the answer? You turn the volume down, you turn the intensity down. So that's all this is I'm doing the same pulses per second, the same duration protocols, just, it's just a much, much, much gentler and lower intensity. And if that's something you want to experiment with, there it is. And those are, as best as I could do, I can't guarantee this, they're the same pulse patterns for the same duration that you would get from TMS treatment. It's just that they're much, much, much lower intensity. If you read the scientific literature, many people agree that lower intensity is better for TMS. That's why it's there. The next one I think is actually the most reasonable and scientifically based section. That would be the pastel violet or purple, alpha wave, beta 1, beta 2, beta 3, and these are just for brainwave entrainment. So all I did was try to take a consensus from the literature as to what the range of waveform of patterns would be. And you got to keep in mind, if you actually look at real beta waves or real alpha waves, they're not some precise frequency. They actually go up and go down, and they have this rhythmic increase and decrease, right? So that's what I did. I programmed in these longer wave cycles of 10 or 20 minutes where they go up, and the frequency goes up and down. And so you can kind of simulate alpha waves or beta waves or delta waves or theta waves. And oh man, I get literally thousands of people say, can you make me sleep better, right? And I don't know anything about sleep, but I can program a microcontroller to give you certain pulse patterns. So this is the one place where I think the frequency does really matter, because the brain is known to respond to certain frequency bands in different ways. It gets the brain to respond differently in alpha waves rather than delta waves, for example. So this is where frequency does matter. I would never say frequency has no bearing whatsoever on stimulation, because I know that's not true, because you fast twitch and slow twitch muscle and brainwave entrainment. What I'm saying is that this is a special case in PEMF where the frequency is got to be more carefully restricted in a range, because if you get up towards the gamma wave, 32 to 47 hertz or higher, and use that on your head, that can actually be quite irritating to a lot of people. So you got to be really careful. And in fact, I don't, generally speaking, I don't put PEMF on my head because that's not something I want to experiment with. But a lot of people have asked me for it, so there it is. It's I don't know that it's dangerous. I wouldn't say that it's safe either, because anything you do to mess with your head is, you're playing with your brain. So you got to be really careful, right? This device that I've built is not child-proof. It's like a car. You can drive it responsibly like an adult, or you can take it out and wrap it around a telephone pole. It is entirely up to you. And then, of course, at the bottom are the same 5 protocols that I listed at the top, which are the main ones that I'm doing research on, the main ones that I use myself mostly. but they also have rest periods on them, and this is on the M1 specifically, right? So those are, and just because sometimes a period of rest does actually allow it seems to, I'm going to just use imprecise terminology here, lets the body reset so that, sometimes just a rest period, just like when you're exercising or anything else, is kind of important. So I'll stop sharing there so that we can see each other a little more clearly. That's basically an explanation of what those are for. So rather than me trying to anticipate your other questions, if the questions in your mind have changed, certainly ask me whatever you want to know. But that's
okay. So for the protocols, are there specific protocols that seem to work better with certain painful conditions or inflammation conditions? Has there been a trend?
I was a little surprised by this, but I was wrong to think that it has no bearing. Mm-hmm. It does have a bearing. It's just not the primary thing. Is not the frequency. The primary thing is the waveform, I still think. But as a secondary matter, some people just respond better to some waveforms than others. They just do. And some people are super strongly opinionated about this. Like some clinicians who've been using PEMF for years, they'll say, you absolutely positively must use, Schumann 1 or something like that for pain. And for musculoskeletal pain and injury, I have used B5, C5, A9, P2, Omni 8, all the Schumanns. And believe it or not, I even, for musculoskeletal pain, which is very effective for me, I use the alpha wave. And it just happens to be a little bit higher frequency than the 10 pulses per second. And it seems to work really well for me. And I had one clinician, absolutely, I mean, this guy was super adamant about it, that you must use the exact frequency, for the exact thing. And he really wanted a map between a frequency and a condition. Frequency X treats or cures condition Y, and only, and he sort of wanted it that clear. And he would yell at me, and I didn't know how to respond to him. And then one day he called me kind of sheepishly after I had sort of countered him, gently several times. And he said, well, he had used his unit, he had an M1, to treat someone's head, where he was using an alpha wave because he was trying to change their brainwave status. And he forgot to reset the frequency pattern, and he put it on his lower back, which he had been telling me for months. It must be, I think he was saying Schumann 1, but he was using an alpha wave on it. And he said, boy, it worked even better. Wow. So what I'm saying is, what I have found, I will tell you. Well, let me see here. Stop share. What I have found is that, yes, in fact, some of them do work better for me than others for musculoskeletal pain.
Okay. And go ahead.
What's kind of important is that depending on where the pain is on my own body, sometimes Schumann works better, sometimes alpha wave works better, sometimes Omni 8 works better. When I beta tested it among people, I tried different frequencies and different stuff. I actually beta tested this several years ago. And most people for musculoskeletal pain said Omni 8 worked the best. That's why it's a sort of a standard protocol that I use. But not everybody. And what's most interesting is that over time, people change. And at different times and different locations on their body and different times of day, their opinion changes.
So looking at the card and the different color coding, is it possible to say that blue works better for musculoskeletal, or pink works better for anything having to do with the brain? Are we able to differentiate in terms of the colors in a category to make it easier to apply the microphone?
I would say if you don't know where to start, for musculoskeletal pain, I would start with the blue. That's why I color coded it. So if you know nothing about this and you are not an experimenter by nature, you just want an answer. Because most people who are in pain, they just want an answer. They don't want to be like, okay, let's blithely run off and do some experiments. They're just like me. They're just like, okay, pain, I want it to stop. I would start with the blue ones. And if it works for you, then you might start experimenting. And a lot of people would say, a lot of people whose expectations and their mindset is toward earthly kind of resonance and earth-based connectivity, I would start looking towards the yellow. If you start doing an excursion towards the experimental, start with the blue and then go towards the yellow. If you're trying to follow something that was done in a scientific paper, and we can talk about that because I think now you know a lot more than most people know about science than, because you've got your PhD. I can tell you a lot about it. Scientific papers never, ever prove anything. They never, ever give you the optimal best solution for something. What they do is they just simply show you some person took a guess somewhere, tested a hypothesis, and the average of group A was statistically different from the average of group B, and that makes it publishable. And that's what a paper does. But a paper does not prove that, 10 hertz is the exact frequency for treating prostate, or 4 hertz is the exact frequency for treating prostate. No such thing. Because you'll never find a paper where they actually tested a whole spectrum of frequencies and picked one out and showed that it was really different from the other ones. It doesn't exist. No such paper exists. But if you don't believe me, and you absolutely feel like you have to do exactly what was in a paper because that was proven, which it wasn't, or optimized, which it never is, you can go ahead and then foray into the pastel pink ones if you want to do experiments. And if you want to do something on your brain and you want to work in certain ranges that should be acceptable to you, for, without causing you too much distress, I hope, by being in about the right frequency range for different brain states, you can try the pastel purple ones. But be aware that sometimes the least expected ones seem to work the best for something. Like a lot of people have started using the purple ones for musculoskeletal issues because several of them do tend to be slightly higher frequency range than the experimental baseline 10 hertz that I'm using. And for some people that seems to work a little better for musculoskeletal issues. And don't forget, any injury you have is part of a larger system. So there is central nervous system involvement, stuff like that, right? So it's really hard to say, well, this is just an injury in this type of tissue. There's other things going on. And I can tell you, and it was kind of funny, I was at a scientific meeting and there were people lined up to talk to me about this because they wanted to share their experience with me, right? And it just so happened that 3 people, one after the other.
On a conference call.
Okay. Standing by. See, this is the kind of thing we don't edit out. This is real life. I mean, sometimes my kids will walk in the room.
I'm sorry, my golden retriever puppy ran off.
That's okay. I'm sorry your puppy ran out too. I was just saying to people, my kids walk in the room sometimes and everything. This is unvarnished. This is an actual conversation. This is not some polished advertisement for anything. But anyway, I was saying that I was at the scientific conference and there were people lined up, right? And it just so happened that all 3 of these people in line were going to tell me about their experiences with sleep. And one person came up and said, the first person said, I've done so many experiments with it and your device works really well for sleep. But the only one that really works well is theta. And you need to start telling people it's theta. And the person right behind her was another woman said, no, it's delta. And I've done this every night for like 6 months and delta works and theta just irritates me. And then the person behind her said, no, it's alpha because I get this calm alertness and it lets me sleep better. And they actually were arguing, kind of animated argument enough that I kind of felt like I should stay out of it. And they sat there they stood there for like 45 minutes arguing with each other over which protocol worked best. And to me, it's sort of like people arguing over what's their favorite color. I mean, if you got a favorite, you got a favorite. That's cool, man. That's all you, right? And some people like one thing and some people like another, and their opinions change over time. And Depends on a lot of things.
Has anybody done a study on the different protocols to see which protocols are best for different conditions?
Absolutely not, because such a study, think about it, because you know a lot about statistics and everything. Think about all the different groups you'd have to have. First of all, speaking now scientist to scientist, it is extremely difficult to just simply show that some group with PEMF is actually statistically different from some other group that's not using PEMF. So just doing a study with a single intervention set to a single set of parameters, just pulling that study off in a controlled fashion is virtually impossible. It's impossible to get funding for PEMF to do that kind of a study. Now imagine you have a study where you're saying, well, we're going to try all these frequencies and we're going to try all these patterns. Okay, and a typical study with humans costs about $50,000 per subject. So if you're doing a controlled study, so if you want to test 10 versus 10.1 hertz, you're looking at spending $1 million right there. And nobody's willing to do it because nobody's willing to fund it. And also people aren't willing to do it because deep in their hearts, people who do PEMF stuff, we know that 10 hertz isn't different from 10.1 hertz. And I can tell you, you can sift through the literature all you want, and you will never find a paper that says we tested every frequency and every pattern. Because if you do start to test every frequency and every possible pattern, you end up with really, really large numbers of combinations. We're talking about numbers bigger than billions. No way, within the constraints of the resources and time available in the universe, there's no way to test every combination and every pulse pattern and every frequency. There's no way. So a lot of it is you just have to sort of, like I've been doing, okay, well, what sorts of patterns do we see during growth and development? Do those patterns basically work? But most people go through this illusion in life that we've tested everything and we know everything. We've actually only safety tested a few hundred chemicals. There's hundreds of thousands of chemicals. We don't know the effects of most things that are produced by factories. We don't know about that. And there are 200 million times more ways to do PEMF than there are different chemicals. There's no way that we can sit down and optimize PEMF. We haven't even gotten a handle on just chemicals yet, much less PEMF, which is hundreds of millions of times more complex than all of the chemical universe. So there's no way to really say, with precision that one thing works and another thing doesn't. And the day may come when they do a test. But what you'll find, because you can see this by just general observation, that other factors are much more dominant than the frequency. And one that is, I would say, 85 to 90% of the answer is the right waveform. And then layered on top of that, maybe 10 or 15% of the effect might be the frequency pattern. That's my scientific opinion based upon careful observation for 25 years.
So next question, the micropulse, it is set to a basic protocol, and that is the blue.
Yep, correct? Omni 8 usually, we send out.
Okay, Omni 8 is the name of that protocol, the blue protocol. Why did you pick that protocol to be the basic protocol for the micropulse so that when you turn it on, that's the protocol?
Because I mentioned this earlier, but I didn't completely make it a replete explanation. While I was developing the M1, the Generation 6 ICES, back around 2014, 2015, I did a lot of beta testing. And a lot of these units were being used by people that I knew, people who had been our customers who I thought were giving me intelligent feedback. So I was like, hey, I got this new technology. You want to try it? Maybe you're watching this video. There's going to be people who watch this video who remember that beta test. Oh, yeah, Bob, I remember you asked me. Well, I asked a lot of people who I had interacted with to try it for musculoskeletal pain and give me their feedback. And most people, for most types of musculoskeletal pain, told me that the Omni 8 was better than the other things I was testing. Like I actually had an Omni 1, an Omni 2, an Omni 3, an Omni 4, and different patterns, an A9, a P2. The one that worked the best for everyone. But it was barely, it was like a really close race. And the Omni 8 was, I would say, maybe 15% better than the pack. But that could have been, it could be wrong. It wasn't a test that wasn't scientific, and I didn't have controlled groups, and I didn't do all these things that people think makes science stronger, and sometimes makes it weaker actually by excluding too much. But overall, it was my opinion when I looked at everyone's input and from the beta testing, I thought that the most people for the most different things got the most benefit from the Omni 8.
Okay. So next question. It's my understanding that there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 protocols on the micropulse.
6 groups of protocols.
6 groups of protocols. Okay. And do the protocols, can you use more than one protocol at one time, or does the micropulse only?
It'll only do one of those lines. So you're picking like number 1. You might use the B5, C5, but that does not mean that you're using the Omni 8 or whatever right then. Then you have to reset it and then click down to the Omni 8 and then run that. So you can run any one of those horizontal lines. Each one of those is a pulse pattern. They're roughly grouped based on a similarity that I think is of some technical value. Like the yellow ones are all Schumann frequencies, and if you want to mess around with Schumann frequencies and harmonics, pick one of those 5. If you want to mess around with brainwave patterns, I guess I've got about 9 of them there in the purple. If you want to mess around with the ones that I'm working on to try to figure out for musculoskeletal pain and orthopedic injury, stick with one of the 4 blue ones on the top. If you want to get a little bit of a rest in there, if it's a little too intense, maybe we use one of the 4 blue ones at the bottom. Gives you a little rest period.
Okay.
That's what you're only picking one at a time. So you're actually on an M1, you're picking 1 out of 30.
Okay. Before we end the interview, are you able to just demonstrate one time how to go from the basic protocol to just say the next protocol, the yellow?
I could demonstrate that if you want. I have a whole video on how to do that, which shows it very, very, I think, very clearly. But what you do is, here, I'll unplug it. Okay, what you do is you turn the device off to reset it. You turn it on, and when the device comes on, that's its welcome screen. And then after 4 seconds, it goes to the intensity screen, and you can press the white, and as you get a 4-second delay. And as long as you keep pressing the white button, it will keep walking down from 15, 14, 13, 12, 11. And if you miss what you want, you just got to keep walking it down to, 0, and then it'll restart again. As long as you press the button every 4.5 seconds or so, it'll remember it. Once you stop, it'll remember that. Then you wait 4 seconds, and it lets you go to and I was pressing the white button, it lets you go to the select protocol. And there, if you press the white button, it will simply walk down that list. And if you don't press the white button, as I didn't, it then says, okay, whichever one's on, that's the one I remember. And it remembers the intensity and the protocol that you last stopped on, and then it starts doing it. And you know it's working when the little green LED, let me see, put it right in your face there. When the green LED is flashing, the thing's running, right?
Mm-hmm.
And every now and then you'll see a single red flash, and that means it's going from one pattern in that protocol to the next pattern. And so that changes. It could be every minute or 10 minutes or so. If you made a mistake and you don't like your settings, you turn it off and you start again. Like say, I don't, I'm happy with the intensity, so I'm not going to touch it. Or you can press red and skip that. But if you don't know, you just wait 4 seconds. Then you say, no, I want to change the protocol. So now I'm changing. It should go like alpha wave, beta 2, beta 3, delta wave, and kind of walking its way through there. So let's see here. And I'm pressing the white button. So I'm walking through different protocols. Those are the ones with the delays. And then all of a sudden it'll go back to the top. P5, C5, A9, pressing the white button again, P2, then Omni 8. So say I want Omni 8. So then I don't press anymore. I wait for it to go to the next screen. So all it does is it goes to the welcome screen, which tells you what the device is. Then it goes to the set the intensity screen. Then it goes to the set the protocol screen. If you press the white button in less than four seconds, it advances one lower intensity or one lower on the list protocol. And then if you just wait, the next screen is it starts the green flashing and it's going. That's
Okay.
how.
Thank you for that. One other question for the Schumann frequencies in the yellow. When you put on that protocol, does it go through all the Schumann frequencies?
So Schumann 1 stays right at 7.83 pulses per second. If you change to Schumann 2, it'll do 7.83 for like 5 minutes and then 14.3 for like 2 minutes. Then if you change to Schumann 3, it'll do 7.83 for 5 minutes, 14.3 for I think it's 2 minutes, and 28 or 20.8 for 1 minute. So it'll go through the sequence. So if you go all the way to Schumann 5, it's actually doing the first 5 Schumann resonances in sequence. The primary for longer, and then the higher resonances for shorter times.
Okay.
And then
Great.
It cycles back through. So it'll do that whole cycle. It'll go, first primary, secondary, then higher and higher, whichever one you selected. Then it'll just spin back around and do it again. Spin back around and do it again.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much for clarifying and answering the questions about the protocols. And I think it would be really interesting sometime to do a study and interview people and find out exactly what protocols they're using and what protocols work best for different conditions and pain.
Well, Stacey and I talk about doing studies all the time, right? So making this an informal conversation. Yeah, of course. I mean, we've been talking about this, and I think that the thing we want to do is sort of like a crossover, and actually have people try something and then have them change it and say, what do you experience? Do you think it's better or worse? And then kind of, you're kind of walking it in. And there's a thing called in engineering called a binary search. And when an engineer wants to find a number or an answer, it's like, you keep cutting things in half until you get down to the right answer. And that turns out mathematically to be millions of times or billions of times faster than randomly searching a large set, a large solution space. If you can say, okay, I'm going to go ahead and test this versus, this big chunk versus that big chunk, which one of them works better? Okay, so this one works better. So now I'm going to cut that in half. Then I'm going to cut that in half again. I'm going to keep focusing on what seems to work. If you do that, then all of a sudden, billions of options become something you can actually study. But see, that's the way engineers do it. That's why we make so much rapid progress in those areas of technology that are dominated by engineering, because we're doing stuff a billion times more efficiently than they're doing it in medical research, or maybe trillions of times more efficiently. So we can figure things out so much faster. But in medical research, they're kind of mired in this old-fashioned approach of sequentially trying things, and that's a really inefficient and ineffective way to find an answer. And that's what we found here. That's why for 50 years, we've had so few medical breakthroughs, right? It's because people are not searching for the answers the right way. They're not using not intelligently searching the possible solution space. So if you and I run a study, I would like to do it. It's going to be your study, so you can do whatever you want. But my suggestion is that you break it into chunks and then ask people, was this grouping better than something out of that group? And then you start breaking it down and down and down. And very quickly, you'll start to come to answers, hopefully, that are satisfactory. But also, because you're looking at a diverse human population, right? Opinions will vary. And just like the 3 women who are arguing about sleep, there's going to be people who say they've tested it, they have tried everything, and they just don't agree. So I think you're going to have to factor in the fact that diversity is a large and dominant factor anytime you're doing something like this.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for your time and all the information and for talking about the protocols. I know that I've had many people ask me about the protocols, and this interview helped to clarify the information. So thank you so much, Dr. Denis.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ravid, and talk to you again soon.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye.